Good afternoon. Welcome to our session, the penultimate session of our symposium. This session is called Centering Descendant Voices, Lessons from Georgetown University. My name is Kimberly Davis. I am a journalist and researcher, and I'm an Athens native. I am the daughter of Linda E. Davis, whom you've heard from earlier today, and Carlton Davis, who was the first African American from LaGrange, Georgia, to matriculate to the University of Georgia. I'm also a probable descendant of those enslaved Africans who were uprooted by construction and renovation at Baldwin Hall. So I come to this symposium and this session from many angles. And I also was fortunate enough to be a member of the symposium planning committee. So we welcome you all here. Thank you to those who are participating today. And throughout our session, if you would, please put any questions that you have into the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer those questions. So the way this session is going to go is that we'll first hear from Professor Laurie Reitsema, who is an associate professor in the Anthropology department here at the University of Georgia. She's going to give us an update on the Baldwin Hall DNA remains at Baldwin Hall. Then we'll have a panel featuring our friends from Georgetown and the Washington, D.C. area. So Dr. Reitzmann, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Kim. Thanks to all of the organizers and presenters of the symposium. It's been a really important and enlightening couple of days, and I'm looking forward to what I'll learn from the panelists in this particular session about descendant ancestor connections. Like Kim mentioned, I was kindly invited to spend about 5 to 10 minutes giving an update on what's happening with the genetic work involving the Old Athens Cemetery, aka Baldwin Hall. Everyone here who's been following the story knows that the African genetic ancestry of people in the cemetery exploded in the news in 2017, and that suggestions of linking living people to people in the cemetery were made, but news since then has been patchy. I'm the biological anthropologist who is involved in the documentation and recovery of human remains from the cemetery. That work showed the age, sex, health, and ancestry of the people buried there, including the genetic evidence of African ancestry. I wasn't the only person to do so, but in early 2016, when the cemetery had just begun to be excavated, I recommended the administration seek to identify the ancestry in order to figure out who to consult as a descendant community. And the Office of the Vice President for Finance and Administration, who was supporting the osteological documentation, also supported that DNA analysis, both in spirit and financially, back in early 2016. And so we proceeded to collaborate with one of the best labs for this in the US, which was then at the University of Texas during this early stage in 2016. The Office of the Vice President for Research got involved with the DNA analysis in 2017 after we had completed that first stage, and at a time when the second stage was begun but was going slowly. So to summarize a little bit, there were 29 people from the cemetery whose DNA we knew something about in early 2017. 28 had some degree of evidence for African ancestry, and one person had evidence for Japanese ancestry. Those results from that first stage are all based on a type of DNA that is only inherited from mothers, and so it only reflects a person's maternal lineage. A father doesn't pass any of their mitochondrial DNA to a daughter or to a son, only a mother does. This type of DNA is more abundant in human cells, which is why we assessed it first. But the next step is analyzing DNA that's inherited equally from mothers and fathers, which is called nuclear DNA. And this is the kind of DNA we want if we're going to link living people to people in the cemetery. And it was always part of the original plan since 2016, and it's already underway, but it's been going much slower than expected. However, 5 of the individuals have been analyzed for nuclear DNA already, and there are 35 more waiting in line at a DNA facility at the University of Connecticut. This is the location where the University of Texas lab relocated in the last few years.
And what has happened so far?
I would say that I definitely would like to see a broader range of outreach and involvement. I think that up to now, they've been really focusing on a small group of descendants that they've been interacting with. So I think really inviting and welcoming more voices. I think also even with regard to the initial response relative to who was involved in the working group, no descendants were involved in that working group. So really looking to the descendants to take the lead on what we think, would help in the healing process, because I think there is a lot of healing that needs to occur in the community. And, the vestiges of enslavement still exist today. So really looking at this as bringing people together for the process of healing, atonement, and redress. I think that tangibly, one of the things that Adam mentioned, I think, which is very important, is the, just addressing the grave sites, restoring grave sites. I know at White Marsh, there are still unkept graves. And so helping people to, to memorialize those places where their ancestors lay, bodies lie. Mm-hmm. I think that's critical. And just helping people really to restore, reconnect rather with their family histories, with their family stories. And I think Georgetown is doing a good job with that, but really continuing that and allowing descendant voices to be heard with regard to the telling of their family stories. So I'd really like to see, I guess, even more community within the Georgetown student, rather on campus, maybe having, reunions that involve. So what started the first year, maybe that, something that happens every 5 years or something like that, because the community continues to grow. Mm-hmm. And, and it's really the family coming back together. And so, anything that Georgetown can do to facilitate that, I think, is important.
Thank you. Richard, we had a great conversation when I was first talking to you about putting this panel together. Could you tell our participants, our audience, sort of how you came to this work, and then what were some of those first conversations that you had with people, with administrators at Georgetown regarding the enslaved Africans who were sold?
Yeah, no, happy to do that. And just to make clear, in my remarks about Georgetown, I'm not talking about Adam. I mean, Adam is a great supporter and friend. And
that's why he's here.
That's right. And a trusted colleague, and, really has a great amount of credibility in the descendant community. So I'm, trying to make a distinction between the institution and the institutional response is what I'm going to focus on. I'm just a Georgetown alumnus, and I really, 5 or 6 years ago had no particular background in this field. I'm not African-American, did not study African-American history, no particular background in genealogy or slavery or any of those things. But, I knew that there were protests going on the Georgetown campus about this 1838 slave sale. And most of the student demands were sort of very Georgetown centric. They were about changing the script to the campus tour, changing some names on campus buildings, putting up plaques and memorials on campus. Those did not strike me as trivial concerns, but they didn't strike me as central either. And so I reached out to a senior member of the university's official working group, which again was not Adam, it was somebody else. And I had a question, and just one question. And really my question had nothing to do with Georgetown. My question was, what happened to the people? If Georgetown sold 272 men, women, and children to rescue the university in 1838, what happened to them? I mean, the plaques and everything else were nice, but what happened to the people? And, even though I'm nobody, about 6 hours later, I got an email reply, and this person, not speaking for the university or even necessarily for the working group, but, a very senior member of the working group who had been involved for a couple of months, wrote back and said, and here I'm virtually quoting from memory, dear George, or dear Richard, Georgetown looked into this a couple of years ago. And what we discovered was that they all immediately succumbed to a fever in the malodorous swamp world of Louisiana, unquote. So in other words, he was saying they all died immediately and they left no traces. So that was really when I started. And again, the Georgetown Memory Project is an independent organization. So far, we've raised and spent about $250,000 on this work, and it's all genealogical work. And not a nickel of it has come from Georgetown University and the Maryland Jesuits. It's all come from outside the university. But really, I was sort of catalyzed by that response, which, by the way, I don't think he was lying. I think he actually believed that. I think many people at Georgetown believed that. I think that in essence, we Georgetown people maybe first lied to ourselves, if you see what I mean, because we just couldn't bear to imagine that the people survived and thrived and still had kin living, very close by in southern Louisiana. But anyway, I founded an organization to start looking for the descendants. And as I said, roll it forward 6 years until today, and a group that 5 or 6 years ago nobody thought existed now numbers 10,000 direct descendants, living and deceased. I'd say 5,000 or 6,000 of them are alive, but that's a lot. That's a lot of people, especially since for 150 or 180 years nobody thought they even existed. To find out that there are now 5,000 or 10,000 of them is that's a big shift. That's a radical shift in consciousness.
That's a remarkable, and that's the first thing that struck me, is just the remarkable number of people who have been identified as descendants, living and deceased. That to me is one of the reasons I wanted to have this panel particularly. And so one of my last questions is, what do you think that descendant communities like us here in Athens, like myself, what should we learn and unlearn from your experiences, your ongoing experiences with Georgetown University and the descendant communities, and how those things have come together and been pulled apart? What should we learn and what should we unlearn?
I think there's a lot of myths. Certainly, in some ways I was blessed to enter into this work completely unencumbered by knowledge of it or experience of any sort. I approached it, entirely from a standpoint of ignorance. And in many respects, that's a blessing, because the conventional wisdom, again, this is not true of Adam and others who really know this field, but many people would have said, oh, well, they didn't really have last names, and they didn't form stable families, and there are no sacramental records. In fact, Adam, I think, from a conversation I had with him, was one of the members of the working group who advised his colleagues that, there's likely to be a great deal of information about these families. So I think, all of the people we've found, the enslaved people, had first and last names. They had very stable families. They took the Roman Catholic sacraments. There's an enormous amount of documentation about these people decades before the Civil War, and then of course after. We make some use of DNA, but for all of those 10,000 descendants, we have primarily relied on paper-based genealogical archival records. So the provenance, if you will, of a GU-272 descendant, including the two that are with us today, is sort of every bit as good as it satisfies the Mayflower standard. In fact, I know Mayflower descendants who have gotten involved in this project, and I will say, for the very first time, they're jealous of somebody else's family. They're very sort of impressed and intrigued by the GU-272 family, but the documentary paper trail between each and every link in the descendant chain is every bit as good and every bit as solid as a Mayflower descendant. So that's just sort of an indication of how much paper is out there. I think, just to tie this off, I've always said this, look, if you or your university colleagues or somebody doesn't want to find the descendants of the university slaves, you almost certainly won't. I mean, you'll find excuse after excuse after excuse, and you'll convince an entire room full of people just to throw in the towel. But if you do want to find them and you sort of keep hope alive and keep pressing, there's a very, very, very good chance that you will. Not 100% chance, but intentionality really matters. I think it helps a lot that the Georgetown Memory Project, in some ways, it helps a lot that the GMP is independent, because we are shielded and immune to a lot of institutional pressures. We set out as our goal to find these people, and lo and behold, we've found 10,000 of them. So I think, that, and I don't think there's anything particularly special about the Georgetown enslaved people. I think that not every university is going to have the same success, but I think many, many universities could have the same success that we've achieved in some form or another.
Great, thank you. Lynn, for you and Kevin as well, what can people like me or members of other descendant communities learn and unlearn from your experience with Georgetown and what you've read and heard and personally experienced? You're muted.
I would just definitely encourage all the work really to be, as much as possible, for it to be descendant centered, for that to be the central point, and work from there. And so, and organizing yourselves as descendant families, I think, is important. So to that extent that you're able to raise awareness that this history even exists, but then to form those relationships and those bonds, and have teams that are investigating and gathering up knowledge and working together. I think you'll go a long way relative just to establishing that community and bringing the families back together, but also having a force that the university has to reckon with.
Great. Kevin, what about you? What can we learn and unlearn?
Yeah, just echo what Richard and Lynn said, engaging the descendant community and coming in with intentions of finding the people. I would say when you go into these projects, just remember that you're dealing with real people. They're more than just dry bones or names on a ledger. These were real people that breathed and walked this earth and have living descendants, and you're helping people reconstruct their families. And I think that's also part of the healing, just helping us recover what was taken away from us. So.
And Adam, as someone who teaches this and who will continue to teach on this, what do you think we can learn and unlearn? And what are, Richard brought up some of the myths that we have about particularly African-American history. So first, what can we learn and unlearn? And then what are some of the myths that can be debunked about how we learn African-American history?
Thanks, Kimberly. I just hearing Kevin mention the stories, I think it was, you said your grandmother had about White Marsh. That just sparked like 3 projects in my head. And that's, I think, one of the great benefits of having these kinds of conversations. I think one thing that for the descendant community around Athens in Georgia, I think that sometimes there's kind of there are people at the university who really want to work with you and who want to collaborate with members of the descendant community to do oral histories or to do archival research to help people, find new branches of their family trees, or in all sorts of ways. For myself, and I'm going to make a plea to the University of faculty. My experience is that my teaching has been immensely enriched by the context that I've been able to enjoy with members of the descendant community. I've had descendants, GU-272 descendants, come to my classes and share their family histories. Lynn, I think you were you came with us on a visit to St. Inigo's plantation, and that was wonderful. And So I think that for descendants, be on the lookout for people at the university who you can work with. Sometimes we can beat our head against the wall, trying to get administration to do the things we want them to do. But there are other people around who would love to collaborate. And, but I don't have all the ideas. I didn't know about the oral histories at Whitemarsh, but now I do. And maybe, Kevin and I will do something together on that. So I think that's something we can learn. And I just, in terms of Kimberly, your question about learning African-American history, I think the main thing is that we don't know everything right now. We don't know everything already. Sometimes there's a sense like, what more is there to learn? Don't we know all the stories? Don't we all know about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman? And so some of us know those stories, but there's so many more stories to learn, and to learn new things, fresh things, and to make the connection between the past and the present. So many people today just think of history as something that happened a long time ago that has no relation to their lives today. And I think the conversations we're having right now about the history of slavery and post-slavery forms of racism with descendant communities can bring the past closer to the present and help us understand how we got where we are today.
Great, thank you so much. Just a reminder to those who are participating that we look forward to any questions you have in the Q&A. I want to bring a sort of a future vision and ask each of you, where do you want to see this relationship in 10 years? What do you hope for the GU72 descendants and Georgetown University to sort of, I don't know if accomplished is the right word, but where would you like to see that relationship in 10 years? And this time I'll start with Lynn.
Well, I definitely would like to see more descendants having got matriculated through Georgetown. That's number one. And then just, like I said, just Georgetown even serving as a hub, for family connection, for reunion type activities, for celebration of what our families did to support. I mean, it's unfortunate, the way it came about, but at the same time, there's meaning and significance in their existence. And so I really want to see that being celebrated, irregardless of the fact that it came through slavery. They are responsible for something very significant. So I want to see that honored and celebrated continuously, perpetually. So that's what I would say. It's just really to see them uplifted and honored for their lives of service.
Richard, what about you?
I was at a meeting. I think that the big thing I want to see is more, more descendant engagement, more recognition of the enslaved ancestors, more integration of this history, more recognition, more celebration of this history. Originally, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was with one very early group of descendants who met with the president of Georgetown University, who was really being, doing his best to be very gracious, but he kept saying over and over to the descendants, we want you to understand that you and your families are a living part of Georgetown's past. And he kept saying that over and over. And finally, one of the descendants said, I don't know what it means to be a living part of somebody's past, but your future looks pretty good. We'd like to be part of your present and your future. And I think that's what Lynn is saying, that, there needs to be much, much, much more engagement with these families. I mean, as a Georgetown alumnus, I was always taught to love and revere and honor the founders of the university I love, Georgetown. I did, and I still do, except the only difference is now that the people who founded the university are sort of different from the ones I originally understood. My university was founded by generations of enslaved African Americans. I, sometimes say that Georgetown is the oldest and most successful historically Black college in the United States of America, except of course that it was founded by Black people, but not for Black people. But we have this tremendously rich history now that is infinitely more interesting than the history I understood when I was an undergraduate. And I would like to see the administration, as well as the faculty and the students, but primarily the administration, really embrace and celebrate this connection, because I think it's just unimaginably interesting and beautiful.
Kevin, what about you 10 years from now?
I agree. More engagement. I like to see, like as we mentioned earlier, memorializing the burial sites of our ancestors, especially in White Marsh. If you go there now, I mean, you see the history, you see the disparity. The slave cemeteries are literally in the woods and on hills. When I visit there, it's really touching. But getting together, gathering more frequently when it's safe, of course.
Right.
Just coming together, unifying, sharing our stories, sharing our histories. I grew up. I'm sorry. I grew up in D.C. and I had no idea about this history until 2016. So I like to see this taught in schools. This history. This is American history.
And I'll say, Kevin, for me, to make it about myself now, having come back to, I was born in Athens, but we left when I was 5 years old. And my mother is from here and, fourth generation removed from slavery. And when I came back to Athens to live and then learning about this history, I feel connected to the earth, right? I feel connected to the place. And then when you hear and see how our ancestors have been disrespected, it can be very traumatic. And so I wonder, if you've experienced that, or Lynn or Richard or Adam, if you've experienced any descendants that feel any type of trauma around this and what they do. Yes, Lynn.
I would just say every time, because I live right outside of DC. So whenever I drive up to Georgetown or whenever I'm just passing it, like my heart just, it expands, but it also, there's like a sorrow, there's a pride, there's a feeling of, just such a swirl of emotion, really. But it does also make me feel, like you said, very, very connected to the school, to the history. And then knowing that this is a school that's transformed so many lives, it has added to so many people's lives. And my life is a part of that. My ancestry is a part of that. It's overwhelming and it's powerful. And so that's why I also think that it's so incredibly powerful for anybody that, other descendants in your community to be able to connect with their roots, because it does bring about a sense of rootedness and connection, despite the fact that it came from, the evils of slavery. It still brings about a sense of identity that I think is so important today.
Okay. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, it does. I do this research every day, and I go out and visit some of the plantations. Even I'm in Alexandria, so I'm literally at the location where the enslaved were shipped off in 1838, and I just look at Potomac River and look at that image and say, okay, this is the last image they saw before they were shipped off. And I think of my ancestors, how they felt at White Marsh and at Port Tobacco and other plantations, just knowing that they would never see their ancestors again. So yeah, it does. It's dramatic and it's emotional doing this research.
And Kimberly, this is Richard. If I could just add to this,
Yeah.
if you look in the background behind Adam, just over his shoulder, Adam, if you now scooch the other way so they can see the college well. There's this little green pavilion type thing over Adam's shoulder. That's actually the old college well. and that's been there for many, 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 many years. It's the only source of water really in the earliest days of the college. And the ancestors have a very different relationship to that landmark than the rest of us do. The descendants do. I think to most people in Georgetown, it's like, I don't know, it's just a little thing. They're not really sure what it's there for. And I think actually about 30 years ago when the quad was redesigned, the whole thing almost got just scrapped. But the descendants, at least many descendants that I know, feel very connected to that college well, because that's the one place that they know that their ancestors, certainly the enslaved ancestors, people who were enslaved at Georgetown College, they know that their ancestors gathered on that spot because everybody gathered. That was the only source of water at the college, and they had to wash or clean or drink or bathe from that well. And that's a very spiritually important place to them. So because the descendants have a different history than the rest of us, they bring different eyes to parts of the Georgetown campus. And I think it behooves everybody to really, invite the descendants to show us the campus through their eyes, because I guarantee you, they and we will see things differently as a result of that lens.
Right. So we do have a few questions that have come in. What are some practical pieces of advice that the panelists have for us at UGA to get our own sort of memory project going? Key things to start with, especially given the lack of support from the university administration. And Richard, maybe you can speak to this, being independent of the administration.
Yeah, I would say, well, back to Adam's point, I mean, the university is not monolithic. Sitting around waiting for the administration to do anything is just not a recipe for success. You might be able to engage with faculty members, or you might just do it through alumni, or do it through the community. I mean, in the case of the Georgetown Memory Project, we quickly realized that the university really didn't have any of the records we needed. I mean, we had the 1838 sale list, but all the information we were looking for, by definition, was in Southern Louisiana or Southern Maryland. So we just got started. I mean, we were very entrepreneurial, very startup-y. We didn't ask for permission or forgiveness because, it's a free country, and, we're not undergraduates. We don't need anybody's permission to do this. So I would say, work with people who want to do this work, and work with people who want to find the descendants. And the administration may catch up, they may not, but it should really be the least of your concerns. I think centering descendants means putting descendants first at the center of the picture, and leaving the administration where it is, which is sort of off on the periphery. If they want to become central, they can, but if they don't, they're not the center of this story.
I think Adam, were you gonna answer that as well, Adam?
I was just going to say that I think the combination of members of the descendant community working with historians and other scholars in tandem with folks in the archives, the archivists who are custodians of the historical material that can help shed light on people's histories. That's a very synergistic collaboration. And so I think it starts with that kind of cooperation, descendant community, scholars, and archivists getting together to figure out what is actually there and how do we make it better known.
And Lynn and Kevin, if you have an answer to that question, feel free to answer. If not, we can move on to the next one. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. What principles would you suggest UGA follow in addressing its own legacy of engagement with the institution of slavery? If any, what principles?
I would say
Yes.
one is transparency, like be clear about what you're doing and tell people what you're doing, like tell people what's going on, good or bad. Like if there are projects going on at the university that are about the descendant community or involve the descendant community, like make sure descendants know that. But also students at the university, like they should know too. So I think being transparent about what is actually happening, publicizing what's happening is good. And of course, the second is inclusion, just trying to include as many people as possible, including students I found, Georgetown students have been very vocal in pushing the university to acknowledge its history and take further steps of redress. So the students at Georgetown, for instance, voted in 2019 to establish a student activity fee to support a fund that would help to benefit members of the descendant community. So students should be included in these kinds of activities, and they're very creative and they have a lot of energy and can be very useful to advance all sorts of different kinds of projects. And of course, the theme of this panel, centering descendant voices, that's essential.
There's a question for the descendants. What is the most meaningful action that has taken place for you during this entire time and during this project? Meaningful action.
For me, I would say just the reconnections of the families. In my case, Louisa was again warned of the sale. She had older siblings that ended up on plantations in Louisiana. So as a result of learning about this history, I've been able to reconnect with the descendants of her siblings. And so that's just been extremely powerful. And just again, the coming together of not just in that family, but other families, and just the love and the camaraderie and the history and the deep sense of connection that's been established as a result has just, for me, been tremendous and very healing, because I grew up, kind of away from family. And so this was very, very powerful for me, just that sense of that reconnection that's occurred.
There is a question about the Georgetown Memory Project accepting donations. And if you want to give the website, Richard, feel free to do that. How are you able to do so much time-consuming research? Legally, how does one set up such a project? And maybe what we'll do, because we're almost out of time, Richard, you and I can get on a call or have an email exchange, and we can follow up with that, and then we can post that on our website.
That would be
I
great,
wanted
yeah.
to give Dr. Reitzmann the opportunity to make any closing remarks that she wanted to make, because we lost her camera connection and she came back on. We know that Dr. Reitzmann has been a very important part of what has happened with Baldwin Hall. We know that she has been, she had called for transparency very early on, and a lot of that was ignored. And we just really appreciate, her efforts in doing this work. And so, Dr. Reitzmann, I wanted to just ask you about what your commitment is to this project going forward. And we know that earlier you already have said that you wanted to make sure that the descendant community was engaged.
Thanks, Kim. So you asked a few questions. One of them was, moving forward, what will my involvement be? And in this panel and in other points of time in the last few days, it's been stressed that an administration has to move slowly. It does move slowly, and it isn't the wellspring of progress in projects like this. And so the university might be able to fund or move ahead work that helps to validate connections of members of descendant communities. I'm thinking here of Baldwin Hall and the Old Athens Cemetery. They may play an instrumental role in that, but in case that timeline is slow or in case it's not happening, there are things that we can do as members of university faculty to do good in that respect. And so it's my hope that I can, continue to be a link between people who draw connection with people in the cemetery, working with scientists who are involved with this DNA lab to try to build and establish these connections, maybe with the university's administrative help and possibly, without. So there are steps ahead. I have already been fortunate to meet a lot of people in the course of this work, and I hope to continue working with them. People like Fred and Linda, who have done so much to bring the issue of the Old Athens Cemetery to the forefront. You, Kim, as well. And working with you to try to move ahead with these really important genetic links is something that I want to stay involved with, and I really want to see progress with it in the next year. And also just, it's been a privilege to be an attendant, to listen into this panel. I didn't completely disappear. Learning about the importance of connection and a sense of place that can come from continued diligent work, finding ancestors, and also, of course, the fruits of collaboration, folks at universities and people outside them, all of the good that can come from it and how natural those collaborations can be. I think there's some fear in universities, perhaps, of those kinds of connections, and there doesn't need to be. And so this whole symposium has just been proof of that. And, I hope a lot of people are watching, and I hope that I'm sure that there will be good that comes from the symposium. I hope I answered your questions, Kim. Let me know if, okay, all right, great.
Great, that's a great note for us to end on. I want to thank all of you, Lynn, Kevin, Adam, and Richard, and you, of course, Laurie, for agreeing to participate in this panel. I really greatly appreciate it, and I do hope we all can stay in touch. I just thank you sincerely. And I'll likely be calling on all of you at some point in the future as we here in Athens move forward for more freedom. I want to ask everyone to please hang on, because our final session of the day will be coming up at 4:45. It's the present, recognition, reconciliation, and redress. During that panel, we'll have a demonstration of the Athens Area Black History Bowl with students from Mount Pleasant Baptist Church doing a short demonstration of the Black History Bowl that they compete in every year. And then we'll have a performance called Joyful Joyful by the East Athens Educational Dance Center Performance Group, led by their director, Nina Gilreath. Thank you so much. Oh, and then following that, I'm sorry, we'll have our closing by Linda Davis, my mom. So thank you all very much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. And I wish you Godspeed in everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.